The transport ship landed with a heavy thud that shook the metal floor beneath their feet. And Commander Vexari stood at the edge of the landing platform with his arms crossed behind his back, watching as the new conscripts marched out one by one into the harsh yellow light of the Coalition base on Keth 7. He was not impressed by what he saw. First came the Kreth warriors, towering beasts that stood nearly 3 meters tall with skin like gray stone and muscles that could crush steel beams without effort. They were the frontline soldiers, the ones who would charge into battle and tear enemies apart with their bare hands, and Vexari nodded his approval as they passed. Next came the Selvani, 4-armed beings with sleek blue skin and eyes that could track a dozen targets at once. They were the marksmen of the galaxy, capable of firing 4 weapons simultaneously with perfect accuracy, and Vexari allowed himself a small smile as they took their positions in formation. Then came the Okalari scouts, strange creatures with 7 eyes arranged in a crown around their heads, each eye capable of seeing in different spectrums of light. They could spot an enemy from miles away, detect heat signatures through walls, and see through almost any deception, and Vexari considered them the most valuable soldiers in his entire unit. But then he saw the human, and his smile disappeared. The creature that walked down the ramp was small, barely reaching the chest of the shortest Kreth warrior. It had only 2 arms, 2 legs, and soft pink skin that looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. It had no claws, no armor plates, no natural weapons of any kind. And worse than all of that, this human was damaged. A terrible scar ran down the left side of its face, starting at the forehead and cutting through where the left eye should have been. In place of that eye, there was only a patch of synthetic skin, smooth and lifeless, marking the human as incomplete and broken. Vexari felt anger rise in his chest as he turned to his second-in-command, a Selvani named Crix, who stood nearby with all 4 arms clasped in front of him. "What is this?" Vexari demanded, pointing at the human with one sharp finger. Crix shifted uncomfortably and pulled up a data tablet with one of his many hands. "His name is Marcus Cole, Commander. He was assigned to us by Central Command as part of the human contribution to the war effort against the Vorn Collective." "I requested soldiers," Vexari hissed, "not charity cases." "Look at him, Crix. The creature only has 1 eye. How is he supposed to fight when he cannot even see properly?" The other conscripts had noticed the human now, and whispers spread through the formation like wildfire. The Selvani laughed openly, their musical voices carrying across the platform in mocking tones. The Kreth simply stared with expressions of pity and contempt. The Okalari turned all 7 of their eyes toward Marcus and then looked away, as if the sight of a being with so few eyes was too sad to bear. Marcus Cole stood alone at the end of the formation, and he said nothing. He was not a tall man, standing just under 6 feet with a lean build that showed strength but not bulk. His hair was dark and cut short in military fashion, and his single remaining eye was a pale gray color that seemed to look through things rather than at them. He wore the standard Coalition uniform, but on his back he carried an old bag that clearly held something personal, something that was not standard issue. Vexari walked toward him, and the other conscripts parted to let the commander through. "Human," Vexari said, stopping directly in front of Marcus and looking down at him with cold eyes. "Do you know why you are here?" "To fight the Vorn, sir," Marcus replied, and his voice was calm and steady, showing no fear. "To fight the Vorn," Vexari repeated with a bitter laugh. "Tell me, human, do you know anything about the Vorn?" "I know they have camouflage technology that bends light around their bodies, sir. I know they can become nearly invisible to most species. I know they have been winning this war for 30 years because no one can see them coming." Vexari was surprised that the human knew so much, but he did not let it show on his face. "Then you know that detecting a Vorn requires binocular depth perception," the commander continued. You need two eyes working together to spot the tiny differences in light that reveal where a Vorn is hiding. You need parallax vision to see through their camouflage. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You have one eye, human. One single eye. You cannot see what needs to be seen. You are useless to me. Marcus did not flinch, and he did not look away. I understand, sir, he said simply. Vexari stared at him for a long moment, searching for anger or shame or despair in that single gray eye, but he found nothing. The human's face was as calm as still water, and something about that calmness made Vexari uncomfortable in a way he could not explain. You will be assigned to sanitation duty, the commander declared, stepping back and raising his voice so all the conscripts could hear. You will clean the barracks, maintain the equipment storage areas, and dispose of waste. You will not be given weapons training. You will not be sent into combat, and you will not waste the resources of this unit. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Marcus answered. Vexari turned and walked away, dismissing the human from his thoughts. That night, while the other soldiers slept in their bunks and dreamed of glory and battle, Marcus Cole sat alone in the maintenance bay at the back of the base. The room was cold and dark, lit only by a single overhead light that buzzed and flickered with age, and the air smelled of cleaning chemicals and old machinery. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a long object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, carefully, with hands that knew every curve and angle by heart. Inside the cloth was a rail rifle, an old model that had not been manufactured in over 20 years. The metal was worn smooth in places from years of handling, and there were small scratches on the stock that told stories of 100 different worlds. This rifle had belonged to his father. Marcus had learned to shoot on the mining colonies of Tau Ceti, where dust storms could turn the sky into a wall of brown static for weeks at a time. His father had taught him to hit targets he could not even see, to read the wind and the dust and the shadows, to understand that seeing was not the same as looking. When he lost his eye in the accident 3 years ago, everyone told him his shooting days were over. They were wrong. Marcus field-stripped the rifle with practiced ease, checking each component and cleaning each part, and when he was done, he held the weapon up to the light and smiled a small smile that no one else would ever see. Let them think he was useless. Let them assign him to clean floors and scrub toilets. The Vorn were out there in the jungle darkness, invisible and deadly, and soon they would come. When they did, Marcus Cole would be ready, and he would show this galaxy what a one-eyed human could do. 3 weeks passed on the jungle moon of Keth 7. And Marcus Cole fell into the routine of his new life as the Coalition's least important soldier. Every morning he woke before dawn and began his rounds, pushing a cleaning cart through the endless corridors of the base while the real soldiers slept or trained or prepared for missions. He mopped floors that no one noticed, emptied trash containers that no one thought about, and fixed broken equipment that no one else wanted to deal with. He was invisible in a different way than the Vorn. Invisible because no one cared enough to see him. But Marcus did not mind, because being invisible gave him time to watch and learn. He watched the Oculari scouts as they practiced their detection drills, all 7 eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of enemy movement. He noticed how they relied completely on their enhanced vision, trusting their many eyes to catch what single-eyed creatures could not. He noticed how they looked at everything at once, and therefore focused on nothing in particular. He watched the Selvani marksmen as they trained on the shooting range, their 4 arms moving in perfect coordination as they fired at targets hundreds of meters away. He noticed how they aimed using depth perception, judging distance by comparing the images from their 2 front-facing eyes. He noticed how lost they became when smoke grenades obscured their view. He watched the Kreth warriors as they practiced hand-to-hand combat, their massive bodies crashing together like mountains colliding. He noticed how they depended on their strength and their armor, believing that nothing could hurt them if they were tough enough. He noticed how they never thought about enemies they could not grab and crush. And every night, when the base was quiet and the other soldiers were sleeping, Marcus would slip out to a clearing behind the supply depot with his father's rail rifle, and he would practice. He would close his eye and listen to the jungle, hearing the insects sing and the wind move through the leaves and the small animals scurrying through the undergrowth. He would open his eye and study the shadows, watching how the moonlight fell across the trees and where it bent in ways it should not. He would raise his rifle and fire at targets no one had set up for him, targets that existed only in his mind, and he would hit them every single time. The other soldiers thought he was strange, and they left him alone. On the morning of the 22nd day, everything changed. Marcus was mopping the floor outside the command tent when he heard Commander Vexari arguing with a Selvani communications officer inside. "What do you mean you have lost contact with Patrol 7? The commander demanded, his voice sharp with worry. "They stopped responding 40 minutes ago, sir," the officer replied. Their last transmission said they had spotted unusual movement near the eastern ridge, and then there was nothing. "We have tried to reach them on all channels, but there is only silence." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine, and he gripped his mop handle tighter. That was when the screaming started. It came from the northern perimeter, a terrible sound of voices crying out in pain and fear, and then gunfire erupted from multiple locations around the base. Marcus dropped his mop and ran toward the sound, pushing past confused soldiers who were stumbling out of their barracks with weapons in hand. When he reached the northern watchtower, he found only bodies. 9 coalition soldiers lay dead on the ground, their blood soaking into the dirt. The Kreth warrior who had been standing guard was slumped against the tower's metal leg with a massive hole in his chest. 3 Selvani marksmen had been cut down mid-stride, their forearms reaching for weapons they would never fire. 5 Okulari scouts lay in a heap, all 7 of their eyes staring at nothing. They had died in less than 4 seconds, and Marcus could tell this because their bodies were still warm. The base erupted into chaos. Commander Vexari came running with a squad of soldiers behind him, and his face went pale when he saw the carnage. The Selvani began firing into the tree line at random, their forearms jerking in different directions as panic took hold of their minds. The Okulari tried to scan the jungle with their 7 eyes, but they were seeing too much, processing too much information, and they could not focus on anything. "Where are they?" Vexari shouted, grabbing an Okulari scout by the shoulders and shaking him. "You have 7 eyes. Find them." "I cannot see them, Commander." The scout wailed, his eyes rolling wildly in their sockets. "The Vorn camouflage is too perfect. There is nothing to see." More screams came from the western side of the base, and then from the south, and then from the east. The Vorn were everywhere, and they were nowhere, and the coalition soldiers were dying. Marcus stood in the middle of the chaos, and he did not panic. He closed his eye and took a deep breath, letting the sounds of battle fade into the background of his mind. He opened his eye and looked at the world the way his father had taught him to look, not searching for movement, but studying stillness, not looking for shapes, but reading shadows. There, 40 meters to his left, near the supply depot where he had spent so many nights practicing, something was wrong. The jungle shadows fell in straight lines from the trees, but in one spot, a shadow bent slightly, curving around something that should not be there. The morning light passed through the air cleanly everywhere else, but in that one spot, it seemed to shimmer ever so slightly, like heat rising from hot metal. A normal person with 2 eyes would have looked for parallax, comparing the images from both eyes to find depth. They would have failed because the Vorn camouflage was designed to fool that exact method. But Marcus had only 1 eye, and his brain had learned a different way to see. He did not compare 2 images. He analyzed one image with perfect focus. He saw the shadow that fell wrong. He saw the light that bent where it should have been straight. He saw the tiny ripple in the air that marked where something invisible was breathing. The shimmer was moving toward the command tent, where Commander Vashari was shouting orders into a radio. The Vorm would reach him in seconds, and no one else could see it coming. Marcus looked around for a weapon, any weapon, but there was nothing within reach except his cleaning cart. Then he remembered his bag, still sitting in the maintenance bay where he had left it that morning, and inside that bag was his father's rifle. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, his boots pounding against the metal walkways and his heart hammering in his chest. Soldiers rushed past him going the other direction, but he did not stop. He reached the maintenance bay and threw open the door, grabbed his bag, and pulled out the rail rifle in one smooth motion. When he ran back outside, the shimmer had almost reached the command tent. Marcus raised the rifle to his shoulder, took one breath, and fired. The rail rifle kicked against Marcus's shoulder as the magnetic coils launched a metal slug at incredible speed, and the sound of the shot cracked across the base like thunder, cutting through the chaos of battle and making everyone freeze for just one moment. The slug crossed 127 meters in a fraction of a second, traveling so fast that the human eye could not follow it, and it struck the shimmer directly in the center of what Marcus had calculated to be its chest. The air seemed to explode. Where there had been nothing but empty space, a massive creature suddenly appeared as its camouflage technology failed. The Vorm was over 7 feet tall with long limbs covered in scales that shifted color even as it died. Its face was a nightmare of teeth and eyes and mandibles, and thick green blood poured from the hole in its chest as it collapsed to the ground just 3 meters from the command tent. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Commander Vexari stood frozen outside his tent, staring at the dead Vorn that had been seconds away from killing him. The Savani marksmen stopped firing into the trees and turned to look. The Okalori scouts blinked all 7 of their eyes in confusion, unable to understand what had just happened. Who fired that shot? Vexari demanded, his voice cracking with shock. A Sylvani soldier raised one of his 4 arms and pointed toward the maintenance bay, where Marcus Cole stood with his rail rifle still raised to his shoulder, smoke rising from the barrel in a thin gray line. "The human," the Sylvani whispered, as if he could not believe his own words. It was the human janitor. Every eye on the base turned to look at Marcus, and he felt the weight of their stares pressing against him like a physical force. But he did not have time to explain or celebrate, because out of the corner of his single eye, he caught another shimmer in the tree line. He shifted his aim and fired again. The second shot was even more impressive than the first, traveling 200 meters through branches and leaves to strike a Vorn that had been climbing into position on a low hill, overlooking the base. The creature's camouflage flickered and died, and it tumbled down the hillside in a tangle of long limbs. Marcus did not pause. He swung his rifle to the right and fired a 3rd time, and the 3rd Vorn dropped from behind a supply container where it had been preparing to ambush a group of fleeing Okulari. Silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining Vorn, wherever they were hiding, seemed to realize that something had gone terribly wrong with their attack. They had expected an easy slaughter, invisible predators cutting down helpless prey, but now 3 of their number lay dead, killed by a single shooter who should not have been able to see them at all. Marcus lowered his rifle and scanned the tree line, but the shimmers were gone. The surviving Vorn had retreated into the jungle, abandoning their assault as quickly as it had begun. Commander Vexari walked toward Marcus slowly, stepping over the bodies of fallen soldiers and around pools of blood, his eyes fixed on the one-eyed human with an expression that mixed disbelief with something that might have been the beginning of respect. "That is impossible," the commander said when he finally stood in front of Marcus. "What you just did is impossible. The Vorn camouflage is designed to fool binocular vision. You need 2 eyes to detect the parallax distortion. You have only 1 eye, and yet you saw them when my Oculari scouts with 7 eyes each could not. Explain this to me, human. Marcus met the commander's gaze with his single pale gray eye, and he did not look away. I see them fine, sir, he said simply. I just see them differently. Vaxari waited for more explanation, but Marcus offered none, and the commander finally threw up his hands in frustration. Differently. He repeated, You see them differently. What does that even mean? A Sylvani scientist named Dr. Thresh had been watching from nearby, and she stepped forward with all 4 of her arms clasped in front of her in a gesture of respect. If I may, Commander, she said, her voice carrying the musical tones of her species, I believe I might understand what the human means. May I examine his records and run some tests? Vaxari waved his permission, and Dr. Thresh led Marcus to the medical bay while the rest of the soldiers began the grim work of counting their dead and treating their wounded. 17 coalition soldiers had died in the attack, but it could have been much worse. And everyone knew that the only reason Commander Vaxari was still alive was because of the one-eyed human they had all dismissed as worthless. The tests took several hours, and Dr. Thresh grew more and more excited with each result. She scanned Marcus's brain and found something remarkable. The visual processing areas of his cortex had rewired themselves over the decades since he lost his eye, developing new pathways and new methods of interpreting visual information. Where a normal human brain compared images from 2 eyes to create depth perception, Marcus's brain had learned to extract depth information from a single image using other clues. Your brain does not look for parallax, Dr. Thresh explained, her 4 arms dancing with excitement as she pointed at the scan results. Instead, it looks for inconsistencies in shadows, variations in light reflection, disturbances in environmental patterns, and subtle motion cues that most beings ignore. You see the world like a painting, and you notice when something in that painting is wrong. My father taught me, Marcus said quietly. On Tau Ceti, the dust storms would block out everything. You could not see 10 meters in front of you for weeks at a time. He taught me to read the world with 1 eye closed, to notice what others missed, to understand that looking and seeing are not the same thing. Dr. Thresh nodded rapidly, all 7 of her eyes blinking in sequence. The Vorm camouflage is designed to create false parallax. It bends light in ways that trick the brain into thinking there is nothing there. But your brain does not use parallax, so the trick does not work on you. You see right through it because you see differently than anyone else. She turned to Commander Vaxari, who had been standing in the doorway listening. This human is not broken, Commander. He is not worthless. He is the most valuable soldier on this entire base. His weakness has become his greatest strength. Vaxari stared at Marcus for a long moment, and then he did something that no one expected. He saluted. It seems I owe you an apology, Marcus Cole, the commander said, and there was no mockery in his voice now, only genuine respect. I looked at you and saw what you were missing. I should have looked harder and seen what you had. From this moment forward, you are no longer assigned to sanitation duty. I am making you a training instructor, and you will teach my soldiers how to see the way you see. Marcus returned the salute crisply. Yes, sir, he said, and for the first time since arriving on Keth 7, he allowed himself to smile. Outside the medical bay, the soldiers of the coalition base were already whispering, spreading the story of the one-eyed human who had killed 3 Vorn in 3 shots. By nightfall, the story would reach every corner of the base. By morning, it would be transmitted to Coalition Command. And within a week, the name Marcus Cole would be known throughout the entire galaxy. But Marcus did not care about fame or glory. He cared about the Vorn who were still out there in the jungle, invisible and deadly, and he knew that they would be back. When they came, he would be ready, and this time, he would not be fighting alone. The training room was packed with soldiers from every species in the coalition, and Marcus Cole stood at the front facing rows of curious and skeptical faces. There were Kreth warriors who could crush rocks with their bare hands, Salvani marksmen who could fire 4 weapons at once, and Oculari scouts who had 7 eyes each. And all of them were there to learn from a one-eyed human who had been cleaning their toilets just 1 week ago. "Close your eyes," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. Nobody moved. "I said, close your eyes," he repeated. And this time, his voice carried an edge of command that made even the Kreth warriors sit up straighter. All of them. "I do not care if you have 2 eyes or 7 eyes. Close every single one of them right now." The soldiers looked at each other in confusion, but slowly they began to obey. The Oculari closed all 7 of their eyes one by one, their faces becoming blank masks. The Salvani shut their 2 forward-facing eyes and then covered their peripheral sensors with their upper arms. Even the Kreth, who were not used to taking orders from anyone smaller than themselves, closed their deep-set eyes and sat in darkness. "Now listen," Marcus said, and he began to walk slowly around the room, his boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. "What do you hear?" "I hear you walking," a Salvani said. "Where am I walking?" The Salvani tilted her head, listening carefully. "You started at the front of the room, and now you are moving toward the right side," she said. "And you are approximately 4 meters away from me." "Good," Marcus said. "You located me without seeing me. Now, what else do you hear?" The room fell silent as the soldiers concentrated. "I hear the air system," an Oculari said, his voice uncertain. "It hums at a low frequency, and the sound comes from vents in the ceiling." "I hear insects outside," a Kreth rumbled, "clicking and buzzing in the jungle." "I hear someone breathing heavily in the back row," another Salvani added. "Probably the Kreth who ran here from the training grounds." Marcus smiled, though none of them could see it. "Open your eyes," he said, and when they did, they found him standing in a completely different part of the room than where his voice had seemed to come from. He had thrown his voice using a trick his father had taught him, and now they understood the lesson. "You have been trained to rely on your eyes," Marcus continued, walking back to the front of the room. "Your entire lives, you have trusted what you see more than what you hear or feel or smell. But the Vorn know this, and they have built their entire strategy around it. Their camouflage does not make them silent or scentless. It only makes them invisible. If you depend only on your eyes, you will die." He picked up a small device from the table beside him and pressed a button. The lights in the room dimmed until they were sitting in near total darkness. "The Vorn will not attack you in bright daylight on an open field," Marcus said, his voice coming from the shadows. "They will come at dawn or dusk, in jungles and forests, in conditions where your eyes are already struggling. They will move when the wind blows to cover their sound, and they will attack when you are distracted. You must learn to sense them without seeing them." For the next 3 hours, Marcus ran the soldiers through exercise after exercise designed to sharpen their non-visual senses. He had them navigate obstacle courses blindfolded, identifying objects by touch and sound alone. He had them stand in circles while he moved among them, and they had to point to where he was based only on the displacement of air and the subtle sounds of his movement. He had them study recordings of jungle environments and identify the moment when the background noise changed, indicating something had entered the area. The Oculari, who had always been praised for their superior vision, found the training especially difficult. "I do not understand," one of them complained after failing to detect Marcus for the 5th time. "I have 7 eyes. I should be able to see better than anyone. Why am I the worst at this?" Marcus sat down beside the frustrated scout and spoke gently. "You have 7 eyes, and that is exactly the problem," he explained. "Your brain receives 7 different images every second. and it spends all of its energy combining those images into one picture. There is no room left for anything else. You are so busy seeing that you have forgotten how to sense. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a strip of cloth. Tomorrow, you will train with this blindfold covering 6 of your eyes, Marcus said. You will learn to use one eye at a time, to focus instead of scanning, to look carefully at small details instead of trying to take in everything at once. And when you have mastered that, you will learn to fight with all your eyes closed, using only your other senses. The Oculari took the blindfold with trembling hands, but he nodded his acceptance. Word of the training spread throughout the Coalition network, and soon Marcus was receiving requests from bases across the entire sector. Commanders who had once dismissed humans as weak and useless were now asking for copies of his training materials. Scientists who had studied the Vorn for decades were rewriting their tactical manuals based on his techniques. Soldiers who had lived in fear of the invisible enemy were beginning to believe that they could fight back. But it was not just the training that was changing the war. Marcus himself was sent on more and more missions, hunting Vorn patrols in the jungles of Keth 7 and killing them with his father's rail rifle. In his first month as a combat soldier, he killed 23 Vorn, more than the entire Oculari sniper corps had killed in the previous year. In his second month, he killed 31 more, including a Vorn commander who had been responsible for the deaths of thousands of Coalition soldiers. The Vorn began to fear him. They gave him a name in their hissing language, a name that translated roughly to the ghost who sees ghosts, and they warned their soldiers to retreat if they detected his presence. The hunter had become the hunted, and the predators who had terrorized the galaxy for 30 years were now running from a single one-eyed human. Commander Vexari called a briefing one evening to share news from Coalition Command. I have received a message from the High Council, he announced to his assembled officers, with Marcus now sitting among them as an equal. They have analyzed our combat records and concluded that Marcus Cole has single-handedly shifted the balance of this war. Because of his kills and his training methods, Coalition casualties from Vorn attacks have decreased by 40% in just 2 months. He turned to Marcus with what might have been pride in his alien eyes. On Earth, you have a saying, Vexari continued. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I looked it up because I wanted to understand you better. But I think the saying does not quite fit. You are not a king among the blind. You are something else entirely. You are the one who taught the many-eyed how to see. Marcus accepted the praise with a humble nod. But even as the other soldiers celebrated around him, he knew that the real battle was yet to come. The Vorn were not defeated. They were only regrouping, and he had heard rumors of an elite unit that was being assembled. Warriors who had undergone experimental procedures to make their camouflage even more perfect. They called themselves the Shroud Guard, and they were coming for him. The Shroud Guard arrived on Keth 7 at midnight. 200 of the deadliest warriors the Vorn Collective had ever created. And they came with one single purpose: to kill the one-eyed human who had turned the tide of war. These were not ordinary Vorn soldiers. Each member of the Shroud Guard had undergone years of experimental modification, their bodies enhanced with technology that made their camouflage perfect in ways that normal Vorn could only dream of. They did not merely bend light around themselves like their lesser cousins. They absorbed it completely, leaving no visual trace whatsoever. They did not make sound when they moved. Their bodies had been altered to produce no heat signature. They were, by every scientific measurement, truly and completely invisible. Coalition sensors detected nothing as they passed the outer perimeter. The Oculari scouts on night watch saw nothing with any of their 7 eyes. But deep in the base, Marcus Cole woke from a dead sleep with his heart pounding in his chest, and he knew that something was terribly wrong. He grabbed his father's rail rifle and ran to the command tent. where Commander Vexari was studying maps with his senior officers. When Marcus burst through the door, the commander looked up with surprise. "Cole, what is the matter?" Vexari demanded. "They are here," Marcus said, and his voice was tight with urgency. "The Shroud Guard. They are already inside the perimeter. We need to evacuate immediately." Vexari frowned and activated his communication device. "All stations, report status," he ordered. But one by one, the responses came back normal. The guards saw nothing. The sensors detected nothing. There was no sign of any enemy presence. "Marcus," the commander said carefully, "are you certain about this? Our systems show nothing. My scouts see nothing. How do you know they are here?" Marcus could not explain it in words. He had not seen the Shroud Guard. Their camouflage was too perfect for even his monocular vision to detect. But something else had warned him, some instinct that went deeper than sight, a feeling in his gut that he had learned to trust during his years in the dust storms of Tau Ceti. "The insects have stopped singing," Marcus said quietly. "When I fell asleep, the jungle was alive with sound. Now it is silent. Something is out there that has frightened everything into hiding. Please, Commander, you have to trust me." Vexari hesitated for only a moment before making his decision. "Sound the evacuation alarm," he ordered his officers. "I want everyone on transports and in the air within 15 minutes. "Move!" But 15 minutes was too long. Before the alarm could even sound, the killing began. Soldiers started dying at their posts, struck down by enemies they could not see, hear, or sense in any way. The Shroud Guard moved through the base like death itself, unstoppable and inevitable, and within minutes, the evacuation turned into a desperate flight for survival. Commander Vasari grabbed Marcus by the arm as chaos erupted around them. "You need to get to the transport," the commander shouted over the sound of screaming and gunfire. "You are too valuable to lose. We need you to train more soldiers, to spread your techniques across the coalition. You must survive." Marcus pulled his arm free and shook his head. "With respect, Commander, I did not come halfway across the galaxy to run," he said, and his single gray eye was calm and steady despite the horror around them. "Get the others out. I will buy you time." Before Vexari could argue, Marcus turned and walked toward the jungle, disappearing into the darkness between the burning buildings. What happened over the next 6 hours would become legend. Marcus could not see the Shroud Guard. Their camouflage was too perfect for any visual detection, even his. But his father had taught him that there were many ways to sense an enemy, and sight was only one of them. He moved through the jungle like a ghost himself, silent and careful, stopping every few steps to listen and feel and smell the world around him. The Shroud Guard made no sound, but they still displaced air when they moved, creating tiny currents that brushed against his skin like whispers. They produced no heat, but their passage still disturbed the undergrowth, bending branches and crushing leaves in patterns that should not exist. They frightened no insects because the insects had already fled, but their very presence changed the quality of the silence, making it heavier and more oppressive. Marcus did not try to find them with his eye. He found them with his soul. He would stand perfectly still in the darkness, barely breathing, and he would feel for the wrongness in the world around him. When he found it, he would raise his rifle and fire at the spot where the wrongness was strongest. And every single time, a Shroud Guard would fall. The Vorn could not understand how he was doing it. They had prepared for a human who could see through their camouflage, but this was something different, something their scientists had never predicted. The one-eyed human was not seeing them at all. He was sensing them with abilities that went beyond any known science, beyond any biological explanation, and they had no defense against it. One by one, the Shroud Guard fell. Marcus's rail rifle ran out of ammunition after the first 50 kills, but he did not stop. He picked up fallen-born weapons and continued fighting, learning to use alien technology through touch and instinct. When those weapons ran dry, he fought with his hands and his knife, moving through the jungle like a force of nature. The Shroud Guard tried to retreat, but Marcus followed them. They tried to set ambush, but he sensed them coming and struck first. They tried to surround him, but somehow he was always one step ahead, as if he knew where they would be before they even decided to go there. When dawn broke over the jungle moon of Keth 7, Marcus Cole walked out of the tree line. His rifle was empty, his clothes were torn and soaked with green-vorn blood. His hands were cut and bruised from hours of fighting, and exhaustion bent his shoulders like a physical weight. But he was alive, and behind him, 200 of the most deadly warriors in the galaxy lay dead. Commander Vesari was waiting at the edge of the base with the survivors of the night's attack, and when he saw Marcus emerge from the jungle, he dropped to his knees in disbelief. "How?" the commander whispered as Marcus approached. "How could you possibly kill them all? How could you find them when they were truly invisible?" Marcus sat down heavily on a fallen log, and for a long moment, he said nothing. "I could not see them," he finally admitted, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Not visually. Their camouflage was too good for that. But nobody is invisible in every way. They still breathed, even if I could not hear it. They still moved air, even if I could not feel it directly. They still changed the world around them, even if I could not see the changes." He looked up at Vexari with his one gray eye. "You do not need to see a ghost to know it is there," Marcus said. "You just need to pay attention." The war changed after Keth 7. The Vorn's greatest advantage, their invisibility, had been broken not by superior technology or genetic enhancement, but by one damaged human who had learned to perceive the universe on his own terms. Within a year, the Coalition had pushed the Vorn back across 3 sectors. Within 5 years, the war was over. And within 10 years, the Vorn Collective signed a peace treaty that ended 30 years of conflict. But the greatest change was not political or military. The greatest change was in how the galaxy saw humans. Before Marcus Cole, humans have been considered one of the weakest species in the known universe. Fragile creatures with no natural weapons, no enhanced senses, and no biological advantages. After Marcus Cole, the galaxy understood what humans really were. Survivors who turned weakness into strength, who adapted to any challenge, who refused to accept limitations that others said were permanent. The Coalition War Academy eventually created a mandatory course called Monocular Tactical Perception. And the textbook's first page carried a simple dedication to Marcus Cole, who taught a galaxy full of eyes how to see. And carved into the wall of every classroom, a single rule reminded each new generation of soldiers why they should never underestimate a human. "They have a way of making their weaknesses into weapons," the rule said, "and their wounds into victories. They do not give up. They do not accept defeat. And when you think they are broken, that is when they are most dangerous of all." Marcus Cole retired to a small farm on a quiet planet far from the war, and he spent his final years teaching children how to shoot and how to see. When he died at the age of 93, they buried him with his father's rail rifle, and soldiers from across the galaxy came to pay their respects. The one-eyed human had seen what no one else could see. And he had changed everything